I welcome everyone, both here in Putnam Hall and those who are and will be joining us online. And our numbers here in Putnam Hall are going to be a little reduced today. Tom and Andy have gone to someplace in Vermont with Don Tardif, and it's an abbey. So prayer and reflection and everything. So we will soldier on without them. And also, we have a parable that Jesus shared with his disciples. It is called the parable of the widow and the unrighteous judge. And it has much to say to us today. So why don't we begin with a word of prayer? God of grace and everlasting glory, we give you thanks for calling us together once again. As we gather around these tables and on the line, we do so knowing that there is wisdom in the sacred words of long ago that you are waiting even now to impart to us. So we ask you to open our hearts that we may be willing recipients of your knowledge, and we may go forth into the day and the week ahead to live it, to the glory of your name and the good of your children. We ask it through our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. All righty. So again, this is a parable that Jesus told. It is less controversial, shall I say, than the last parable that we went and delved into, which was the parable of the unrighteous steward. And that was the guy who was playing around with the books and cheating his master, and he was told he had to turn in his accounts. He was going to be fired, and he, as you may remember, called in a few of his master's creditors and said, you owe this much, take the bill and reduce it by half. And I think the other one was by a third. And the tag or the verse that summarized it is that Jesus wished that the sons and the daughters of this world were as, as true as those who were of darkness. And the point of the parable is that some people are very good at doing that which is not right, and Jesus wants us to be every bit as good at doing what is right. So welcome, Leslie. And I was saying that Tom and Andy are in Vermont at an abbey today, doing a little bit of a spiritual retreat. So without further ado, here is the parable.
Luke 18. And he told them a parable to the effect that they ought always to pray and not lose heart. He said, in a certain city there was a judge who neither feared God nor respected man. And there was a widow in that city who kept coming to him and saying, give me justice against my adversary. For a while he refused, but afterward he said to himself, though I neither fear God nor respect man, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will give her justice, so that she will not beat me down by her continual coming. And the Lord said, hear what the unrighteous judge says. And will not God give justice to his elect, who cry to him day and night? Will he delay long over them? I tell you, he will give justice to them speedily. Nevertheless, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth?
All right. Questions, comments, and conundrums. What do you think of our passage here?
Could you say faith and tenacity could be interchanged in this?
Faith and tenacity.
Yeah.
Are they interchangeable here
In this
situation?
Yeah.
Interesting. My first thought was yes and no. Yes, if you have faith, you're going to be tenacious at times, but you can be tenacious without having faith. And sometimes You can be tenacious, i.e. stubborn, and be going contrary to what faith is really all about and what the Lord really wants you to do. So my answer is faith and tenacity interchangeable? Yes and no. Or here's another way of looking at it. Tenacity can be a part of faith in certain circumstances. I'll tell you, one of the verses that jumped out at me was, where is it? I'm looking for it. Verse 4. So the judge refuses, and he says, though I neither fear God nor respect man. And I wrote in my margin, are there people who are like that today? Yeah, that was sort of a rhetorical question. Absolutely, there are. And there are some people who consider themselves people of faith who, when you really look at it, are not followers of God and not respectful of man. And two that came immediately to mind who are going hand in hand right now are the, I'm trying to think of, it's the title Metropolitan, no, Patriarch, that's what it is, Patriarch, Kirill of the Russian Orthodox Church, who has put his stamp of approval on the aggression against Ukraine. And of course, he's beholden to Putin, who also claims to be a man of faith. And just last week, when they took out that bridge connecting Russia to Crimea, the Russian foreign minister, or maybe Putin himself, decried it as an act of Satan. And I remember thinking to myself, wait a minute, you're bombing schools, you're bombing hospitals, you're torturing civilians, you're making civilians fight against their own country, and you have the audacity to say that the Ukrainians are satanic. Okay, so this is an example of someone who neither fears God nor respects man. And it's all perspective, but not all perspectives are valid. I remember when I was in seminary, I had to read this book. And I think it was for pastoral counseling class. And there was a quote that I never forgot. And it was during the Second World War. And the quote was, for 3 years now, this madman has been running all over Europe, causing death and destruction and basically messing up lives of millions of people. That's not an exact quote, but that was the essence of what was said. And you turn the page and you discover that it was a quote from Hitler talking about Churchill. You know, and it just, you read it and say, okay, this is Churchill or maybe Roosevelt talking about Hitler, but it was just the opposite. So yes, there are people who neither fear God nor respect God's people or people in general.
We have a situation of that going on in the forever fight for racial justice, if you will, in this country. And right now in Texas, this is going on extremely heavy.
Yes.
And the manipulation of rules to go back to the Jim Crow type of rules that is going on there, and the perspective of people who are in position of responsibility and in religious community there tend to turn the definition and meaning of things to their convenience rather than basic humanity, if you will.
So we have, you say, Don, a reflection of neither fear God nor respect God's people um, in what we see going on in the continuing fight for racial equity in this country. And I'm absolutely in agreement with that. It's shameful, some of the things that are being said. And if you look at, in my opinion, a lot of the voting laws and whatnot that are going on, it's all, and I said this in a sermon about a month ago, that you scratch the surface and look behind the curtain, and what you really have is people who are white and in power basically saying, if we keep letting all of them come into the country, and if we don't do something, there's going to be more of them than there are of us, and then we won't be in charge, they'll be in charge. And so it is, in my opinion, not faithful at all. And we look at Jesus, who reached out to people of other cultures.
The theological tie to this, because I've read 2 or 3 books recently, and I'm in another one on it, on these issues in our country, is that you have people, and Putin is one of them, who are concerned about controlling other people for their wishes. And God's word through Jesus to us is care about your neighbor, care about the other person, put your thoughts towards them, not towards yourself. And these people are self-centered to their will rather than God's will. And that's where the conflict comes in.
So there's definitely this struggle that's going on. And as you were talking, I was trying to put myself in the shoes of someone of color, and thinking Martin Luther King Jr. was fighting this battle back in the 60s. John Lewis, the congressman who passed away, and even before that, the Civil War. And so the reality is that there are people who are in the shoes of this widow. And she actually had a few strikes against her. Anyone figure out what the strikes are that she had against her?
Well, she was a widow.
She was a widow, yep. And tied in with that, she was a woman.
She had
No husband, yep.
Worthless, really.
Exactly. So back then,
Not to me.
yes, back then, it was a patriarchal society. And if this widow didn't have a husband to advocate for her, it's only going to make it worse, or more difficult, I should say. And you have to assume that she did not have any sons, because if she did, the sons would be advocating for her. And the implication is, and being a widow and being in poverty often went hand in hand. And one of the things that kind of fascinated me about this parable is, where were people in general?
I was just thinking, it's really sad that the Son of God had to come to earth to make it so somebody would say, maybe we should take care of the poor lady that lost her husband. I mean, the Israelites were supposed to be the people of God and being godly, and it's so ungodly to just say, oh, well,
too bad for you.
Your husband died.
Too bad.
Go be poor and don't eat anything, starve to death.
It's a very good.
You didn't have sons.
It's a very good point, Leslie. Absolutely, because throughout the prophets, the one of the big criticisms for the Jewish people was how they were treating widows and how they were treating people who were poor. And in that respect, I guess you could say that we might be better in the sense that if you're a widow today, you're not as in desperate straits as maybe back then. But
still plenty of people that are fighting with welfare, though.
yes,
Right.
yep. People on welfare get attacked, and And I remember having this conversation with someone, and they were railing against welfare and abuses in welfare. And I said, I have no doubt that there are some people who do abuse the system, and when they're caught, they need to pay the penalty for that. But I said, what about corporate welfare? And the person had no idea what I was talking about, and I gave examples. And I was reading in the paper this morning, there's a company, I'm trying to remember which company it was, they're building a 2-point-some-odd billion dollar factory in Ohio to make batteries for cars, electric batteries. And they're going to be getting a big subsidy, okay? Now, capitalism says, government should not play favorites. Okay, we don't have capitalism in this country, and as much as people want to say we do, we don't, because if we had pure capitalism, governments wouldn't be giving subsidies to multi-corporations. And this is one of the reasons why there were some senators who were opposed to the CHIPS Act, which basically set aside billions of dollars in subsidies and tax credits and everything to get companies to build chips in this country.
The Stimulus Act.
Pardon me?
The Stimulus Act.
Well, it's also national security. So.
Well, yes, it's quoted as national security, and so I understand, the argument for it.
Well, I mean, I get your point.
Yeah.
It's been a very long time. There's been farm subsidies and
Yep.
or whatever, and they've always used tax breaks and things to try to
Sure.
push companies
Yeah.
into a new thing that has benefits,
Yeah.
For all or whatever. There's orphan drug laws
Yeah.
to encourage companies to develop drugs that only a small number of people have the disease, but it's very horrible disease. So
We actually have not a member, well, let me put it this way. We have a member of this congregation whose son is now involved in a patent dispute with Moderna over the COVID vaccine. Bob Mascola's son, I forget his name. Anyways, he runs Dr. Fauci's lab and was very involved in discovering the technology that would allow. And Moderna is trying to cut him out so that they can, and 3 other scientists, so that they can get the whole pie instead of, giving a sliver of the pie to someone who was participating in it. So the reality is that there are groups of people today who neither fear God nor respect their sisters and brothers. And so Jesus is lifting up this widow as an example for us when we find ourselves in situations like that. And so what is it that Jesus is telling us we need to do?
nag,
Pray?
nag.
No, nag. Nag, yes. Yeah, absolutely.
There's a reason people nag.
Yes, yeah. There's,
I guess he's saying stick to your faith is the same. That would be nagging or tenacity. In other words, don't take a method other than the method through your faith. Don't let something outside influence you and draw you away from your faith.
mhm.
Stay true to your faith.
Yep. And do you know that healthcare insurance companies will routinely deny claims because they know that a certain percentage will just give up?
It's the same with disability.
Disability, yes.
Like almost everybody, when you put it for disability, it gets like the long term, like Medicare time, they deny it, and then you have to like redo it, and then like almost everybody gets it.
Yeah. It was the same for my brother. He got denied long-term disability after his car accident, and he had to actually hire someone who works with this whole issue. So yes, and so tenacity, nag, I would say persistence. Okay, you stick to your guns. You know that you are right. Yep. What else?
I can't quite pull it up, but I read Jimmy Carter's 90-year-old most recent book.
Yeah,
And
Jimmy
his-
Carter.
Pardon?
Who was it that wrote it? I'm sorry.
Jimmy Carter.
Jimmy Carter. Yeah.
Former president,
Yep.
who's written about 30 books, actually.
Yes.
And in his observations about stick-to-itiveness, which is another term that you could use for it, when all are against you and somebody offers you a way around it or compromising to get a compromise, if you will, like is a union management type of thing to do negotiations, sticking to your principles. The quote, and I do not have it here, is times will always change, and don't change in your time. In other words, stick to your principles and ethics, even though everything else around you evolves and is different. Apply your ethics to things as they change. You can't change the process of change, which is poorly worded, but stay to your principles as you address those.
Okay, so stick to your principles, and we're back to tenacity, persistence, and everything. And stick to your faith. And, you know, as you were talking, one of the things that occurred to me is there are two kinds of people in the world, according to this saying. And there are people who are outside in people versus people who are inside out. People who are outside in, they just go along with the crowd. They are concerned about what others might think of them. They want to be popular. They want to be liked. And so in a situation where you have to either stick to your principles or your faith, you waver and you go along with the crowd because what people think about you matter. People from the inside out are very different. They are deep in their faith and they know that this is right, this is wrong, and so I am going to follow that path that is right. And I know that there will be consequences, okay? And a simplistic version of it, being a parent, okay? Being a parent at times requires you to be an inside-out person because Billy or Susie wants to do X, Y, or Z. The parent, you know that X, Y, or Z is not right, and or they're not ready for X, Y, or Z, or whatever. And so you have to say that word that kids don't like to hear. And frankly, adults don't like to hear. No, okay? And invariably, what happens after you say no? I hate you. That's not fair. Complaining and everything. I saw an example of this many years ago. And again, you know, we're talking about when you're a parent, there are times when you have to be like this widow. You have to stick to it because you know that you're right. So years ago, I went skiing up at Sunday River. And when it came time for lunch, I went to the lodge and I was in the cafeteria paying exorbitant prices. And there was a father and a son who were right near me. And it quickly became obvious to me that they weren't in agreement on what the son was going to have for lunch. And so the son, who was probably about maybe 5th grade, said, I want a cheeseburger and some fries. And the father says, no, you have that all the time. I'm going to get you a salad and something else. I forget what it was. And the kid kept saying, no, I don't want, you know, blah, blah, blah. And as they're going back and forth, then I heard the kid say, which if I had ever said to my father, the repercussions would have been swift and severe. The kids said, you never let me have a damn thing I want. Exactly. I'm thinking, wow. And so I kind of moseyed on over to the other side of the cafeteria. When I got to the cash register, I'll give you one guess what was on the tray for the kid. Cheeseburger and fries.
I have to side with a kid on this one, so I think a whole day of skiing and have a 5th-grade boy and have a salad and something. It's just not enough.
Not enough. Yeah, I can understand
There's
that.
also a thing about picking your battles.
Picking your battles, true, yeah.
It was an outing.
I do have another example, sorry, which made me think of the
Okay.
a former Senator B. I can't pronounce his first name, Beto or something like that, or Rourke from.
Beto.
Yeah.
Beto
Yeah,
O'Rourke.
I just read his memoir.
Yeah. Yep.
And in his memoir book, he talked about a gentleman, a black gentleman, named Nixon, who lived in El Paso and was recently affluent, middle class, if you will, and paid his poll tax, which you had to pay in order to
Poll
vote.
tax to vote.
Yes, in order to vote, and went to the fire station every year to vote. And then they added new complexities to it that didn't allow him to vote, even though he paid his poll tax. But he went to the fire station every year. He knew all of them, and they said, you know, you can't vote. And he did this for 15 years, and every year his answer was, but I've got to try.
I've got to try, yes. So being denied to vote, and he still went every 15 years and tried to vote.
15 years, and then after that, he could vote.
Yeah. Any of you heard of Sojourner Truth?
Yeah.
She was a civil rights activist after the Civil War, and she would go around and she would give speeches, and this was before slavery ended. And one time, as she was speaking, she got heckled. And the heckler said that when it came to her he cared as much about her abolitionist view as a dog cares for fleas, and she wasn't going to be able to do anything about it. And she said, maybe so, but I'll make you scratch. Okay, so persistence. Okay, what else do we see in the widow that can help us when we are in a situation where it just isn't fair? Oops, I get a question. So Shelley commented, your point about inside out is so true and so hard at times. And absolutely, it is definitely challenging at times. But you know, Jesus said, follow me. And he didn't say, when you follow me, I promise you a rose garden. Okay. In fact, Jesus went out of his way to say on many occasions, if you follow me, it's going to make life difficult at times, but it will always, always make life better. So we have the widow. She's persistent. And what else?
She wants justice.
She wants justice.
No, she's pushing for the object of having justice in her fight against the adversary. We don't know in this case what it is, whether there's a right or wrong on either side, but she wants justice.
Absolutely. And so she does not get her justice the first time she goes. So what does she do? She keeps going again and again and again and again. And if she's going again and again and again, yes, that's persistent, but what goes hand in hand with it? It also begins with the letter P. Patient.
Yeah.
She has to be
She
patient.
didn't take anything in her own hands, it sounds like. She didn't go vigilante and try to get justice for herself that way. She
Right.
kept going through
So,
the
yes,
appropriate channel, apparently.
right. Yeah, she didn't take the injustice into her own hands. She's going through the proper process.
And it seems like her adversary did not do these things.
Yeah, you don't see any thing about the adversary here. You do kind of get the feeling that the judge is corrupt.
Yeah.
And it's sort of, he's going to rule in favor of her adversary who has more clout. Okay. So she is persistent and she has to be patient. Those are two things. When you find yourself in the widow's shoes, you have to be persistent and you have to be patient.
So how do we reconcile like verse 8?
Verse 8, how do we reconcile?
Because it does, like, sometimes people pray for something for, I mean, look at the people, we're just talking about people of color, and
Mm-hmm.
no way
So,
going on if people like want to put them down just for
mm-hmm.
the color of their skin, like, so is that not speedily? In
Yes.
our mind anyway,
So you're focusing on the words that I tell you, he, meaning God, will give justice to them speedily. And that was something else that jumped out at me when I was reading it. And I think of the Hebrews, as they were called then, slaves in Egypt. Gold star to anyone who can tell me how long they were slaves in Egypt. A long time, but it's a specific number. This is a trivia, biblical trivia. Well, what's the game on? No, not Wheel of Fortune. The Price is Right. Okay, high low. Okay, and you'd have to give a number, and they'd say if it's high or low, and you have to narrow it down. So somebody throw out a number. How many years were the Jews? 1,000 less. 100 more. 500 less.
300.
More.
So
400,
What's that?
400,
400 more.
450,
Less.
425.
So we know it's between 400 and 450. Less than 425. More.
We're getting
450.
415 more. So you know it's between 415 and 425. And usually, if I remember, I wasn't a big fan of The Price is Right, but when they would get to this point, they just go 16, 17, 18, 19, 420 years. And then God says to Moses at the burning bush, I have heard the cries of my people, and I'm calling you to go to Pharaoh and say, let my people go. Is that speedily 420 years?
So what took you so long?
What took you so long? What took you so long? Yeah. And the Israelites, when they got taken into captivity in Babylon, how many years were they there?
40.
More. Any guesses? 40? 80 years. Very good, Jane. Gold star to Jane. She got it.
Yes, I had no clue.
80 years. And, a couple of weeks ago,
420.
I did a sermon about Jeremiah and the southern kingdom of Judah is about to fall. He goes to buy the field at Anathoth. And he says to the people, to give them hope, fields and houses and vineyards shall again be bought and sold in this land. The only problem is what he didn't say is, but not by you. Okay. I understand it doesn't sound speedily, but this is where I think of Nancy Crandall. Nancy Crandall was our music director. Oh my gosh, at this point, probably 13, 14 years ago. And I don't even know if she's still with us.
Yeah, we discussed her once before, and she's in a nursing home somewhere. Someone here knew it.
She is in a nursing home?
Senior living facility.
Oh, okay, assisted living facility. So Nancy Crandall, Seventh-day Adventist, very devout, and she was teaching music in public schools, and over the summer, it was cutbacks, and so her position was eliminated. I think she was in Stoneham or Melrose. And so then she started looking, and it was the week before school started, and she still didn't have a position. And I was talking about it with her, and she was very calm. And I said, I would be freaking out at this point, not having a job and school starting. And she said, well, she says, the Lord has a plan for me. Just need to get all of the pieces in place. Okay. And sure enough, week after school started, she got a call and she got a job that paid her more.
And was Worcester.
It was out in Worcester. That was the only negative. It was more of a drive. But, the point being that, what we think is speedily and what God thinks is speedily are two different things. And the reality is that, maybe it was 420 years because nobody came along like Moses, who was capable of doing what he needed to do.
The word in here that I still don't hear being perspective wise used right is justice. Justice means it's going to be resolved for whatever is right. It doesn't say you're going to win or you're going to lose. Or
True.
The other person is going to. So this is about doing the right thing as opposed to a final answer. The way Jesus presents it as the woman wanting justice.
Okay.
She's not saying, solve for me, do what is right.
Do what is right. Do what is right.
And I think there's a big difference between that and rather than saying, oh, she's winning because of her persistence.
So there needs
She's winning justice. She's not necessarily winning the conflict.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, what you're saying is yes, you got to be persistent. You have to be patient, but you also have to be open to the possibility that the outcome and what is good and right and just is up to God, not us. And so it might be a little bit of a different outcome than we anticipated. The third P, what is it? And it's interesting. Jesus says that this is what the parable is all about.
Prayer.
Yeah, prayer. You need to pray. And interestingly enough, he tells this parable about prayer, not losing heart. And not once in the parable does it mention that the woman prays, but I think it's sort of implied. Okay. And so you pray. Okay. And you basically say, Lord, this is not right. Now, does that mean that you sit back and you say, okay, Lord, I'm going to let you take care of this. Let me know when you get it all worked out.
No, you keep the conversation going. That's what prayer is.
Okay, you keep the conversation going. And what does it also mean?
It strengthens you.
It strengthens you. Yes. Yeah. There's a famous saying. I'll have to Google it to find out and remind myself who said it. But it said, prayer doesn't change things. It changes people who change things. And I always thought there's some wisdom in that. So it strengthens you. It helps you know that you're not alone. And it helps you when you listen to get a better clarity over the situation. And, sometimes maybe God's saying, this isn't worth it. This isn't worth it. Let it go. I think of someone many years ago in town who got into a big fight with the Conservation Commission. And she was adamant that she was right. But there was no way she was going to win. No way she was going to win. And frankly, I know that she was right, based upon what I knew. Now, here's the other thing too. When someone comes into my office and tells me a problem, okay, I always will say the same thing. Based upon what you are telling me, this is what I'm hearing. Okay? Because I know that when somebody tells me a problem, they're going to tell me their side of it and shade it to make them look good and the other person look bad. So you know what? Maybe justice means listening, so that instead of getting 100% of what you want, you get 70 or 80 or 90%. Because there are very few situations where, one side is 100% right and the other side is 100% wrong. In fact, one of my favorite sayings was by an ancient Roman senator by the name of Seneca. And this judge did not follow this saying. The saying goes like this. He who decides a case without hearing both sides, though he decide justly, cannot be considered just. In other words, you've got to hear, and I think when you pray, you have to be open to the possibility that you may only be 90% right, or justice means you get 90% of what you want instead of 100%. But again, what we see in this parable is a woman who was very persistent, very patient, and implies that she prayed. And prayer also includes listening so that God can get a word in edgewise. Okay. And, I think I've told the story about when I was a student minister and I was being treated so badly by this woman in a little tiny church. And real small churches, they are what are sometimes referred to as mom and pop churches. There's usually a matriarch and or patriarch, and they call the shots, and nothing happens in the church unless they're on board. And not to say that all small churches are like this, but it is a phenomenon. And so this woman just didn't like me. And I had to present a case study to my class in seminary, probably on church management, I think. Anyways, I presented the case study, and she was really a bully. She really was. And in fact, I can remember having a dream in which I know the dream was from God because it sent a message to me. And in the dream, we were in the vestry at the church. And she was a big woman, and she's standing there, and she said, "I bet you think that because I'm a woman, I won't slug you." And before I could respond, she went, boom. And I woke up from that dream, and I said to myself, I got to realize that what I'm dealing with here is, I have to be realistic about what I'm dealing with here. At the same time, when I presented this case study, all of my fellow students were supporting me and saying, "Oh, this woman is definitely a clergy killer." That's a term that ministers have, and there are churches that have clergy killers in them. And, you have to watch out for this woman. I'm getting all the support. When they all finished, the professor, Earl Thompson, is that his name? Yeah, Earl Thompson. Yep, okay, I was confusing with somebody. Yeah, Earl Thompson looked at me and he said, "This woman knows you pretty good, doesn't she?" And it was like a baseball going through a plate of glass. And all of a sudden I realized, okay, you know what? He has a point. Okay, I need to take the log out of my eye before I take the speck out of her eye. And so again, prayer sometimes gives you the strength to stay with it, and sometimes it leads you to listening, and you say, okay, you know what? I'm 80% right or 90% right. And so I'm going to adjust my approach to the injustice accordingly. But again, and this is why, faith is so important, because in situations like this, you can't run into the sanctuary and say, okay, Lord, I'm here, I got this problem, help me out. It just doesn't work that way. You have to have the foundation in there so that you can deal with the adversity. All right. Anything else? Well, I'm
You
going
said it's the prayer, and you said we have to listen. So basically, a conversation is a two-part thing. So it needs to be, prayer needs to be a conversation.
Prayer is a conversation. Absolutely. Although I've always said, you know what the number one goal of prayer really should be?
Listening.
Well, listening, yeah, that's a big part of it. I mean, think about it. If you knew someone who was always speaking, didn't let you get a word in edgewise, that wouldn't be a very good relationship. And that's essentially what prayer is all about. In my mind, it's all about relationship. It's a relationship with the divine. And the more deeper your relationship is, the more you're able to do what this widow did. The story implies that she's a woman of faith. So, all righty, everyone. I thank you all.
Thank you.
All righty.